What happens when a man throws away a diamond for a piece of glass? Marcus Thorne had it all: a brilliant, loving wife, a baby on the way, and a company on the rise. But it wasn't enough. He traded his pregnant wife, Mina, for a younger model, leaving her with nothing but divorce papers and a broken heart. He told her she was a burden he was shedding. 4 years later, Marcus is desperate, his company failing, begging for a buyout from a mysterious, silent billionaire. He walks into that final boardroom meeting expecting a savior, but what he finds is his past. And the woman he destroyed is now the only person who can destroy him. The rain against the penthouse window was a cold, rhythmic drumming, a miserable soundtrack to a life that had suddenly lost its melody. Mina Hayes. No, she was still Mina Thorne. For now stared at the skyline of Seattle, but the city lights were just a watery blur. She was 7 months pregnant, and the weight of the baby boy under her heart was the only thing that felt real. Everything else had just detonated. Her husband, Marcus Thorne, CEO of Thorne Dynamics, was standing by the sleek, minimalist fireplace, his back to her. He hadn't even taken off his $3,000 Tom Ford overcoat. "Marcus, please," Mina whispered, one hand pressed against the tight swell of her stomach. Just look at me. Tell me this is a joke. A sick, horrible joke." Marcus turned slowly. His face, which used to be her entire world, was now a mask of cold impatience. He was handsome, with sharp patrician features and eyes the color of steel. It was a face that charmed venture capitalists and disarmed competitors. Tonight it was aimed at her. "It's not a joke, Mina," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm leaving. The divorce papers will be sent to you by my lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, tomorrow morning." "Divorce." The word came out as a strangled gasp. "Marcus, I'm carrying your son." He actually winced at that, a flicker of annoyance. Don't do that, Mina. Don't use the baby as a bargaining chip. It's unseemly. A bargaining chip. She could feel a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat, mixing with the bile. "He's our child." "He will be your child," Marcus corrected, finally shrugging off the coat and tossing it onto a white leather chair. He walked to the bar, his movements precise, and poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan 25. He didn't offer her one, not that she could drink. "I will, of course, provide the legal minimum in child support. I'm not a monster." Mina felt the floor tilt. This wasn't happening. This was the man who just 6 months ago had wept with joy at the first ultrasound. The man who had built his entire company, Thorne Dynamics, from a single algorithm she had helped him design in their tiny college apartment. She had been his partner in everything. Why? She finally asked, the one-word question loaded with 5 years of shared history. Marcus swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Because I'm tired, Mina. I'm tired of this." He gestured vaguely around the multi-million-dollar apartment. "I'm on the verge of something huge. Thorne Dynamics is about to go global. I need a partner who can keep up, who excites me. Someone who reflects my success. And I don't." Her voice was small. She hated how small it sounded. He let out a sigh, the kind one reserves for a difficult employee. "Mina, look at yourself. You've let yourself go. This pregnancy, it's all you talk about. You've lost your fire. You used to be a brilliant architect, and now you're just a vessel." Each word was a physical blow. She clutched the back of the sofa, her knuckles white. "I'm growing our family, Marcus. The family you said you wanted." "I wanted the idea of it," he said, downing the scotch. "The reality is messy. It's a burden, and I can't afford any burdens right now." That's when she saw it. On his phone, which he'd left face up on the bar, a new lock screen image. It wasn't the photo of them in Cabo. It was Marcus grinning on a yacht, his arm wrapped tightly around a woman with impossible legs and bright blonde hair. Mina recognized her instantly. Serena Vance, the 22-year-old model who was the new face of Thorn Dynamics' marketing campaign. "Her," Mina breathed, pointing. "You're leaving me." For her, Marcus had the decency to look momentarily flustered. He snatched the phone. "Serena understands me. She understands the demands of my world. She's an asset, Mina. She looks good on my arm, and she doesn't demand things from me. She doesn't have all this need. I need my husband." Mina finally shouted the dam of her shock breaking. "I need the father of my child to not abandon me for a child." "She's 22, Marcus snapped, "and she's more of a woman than you've been in months. And this is done." He walked to the door. "I've already packed a bag. It's in my car. The driver is waiting. My lawyer will be in touch. I suggest you get your own." He paused his hand on the polished steel door handle. "I'd also suggest you move out quickly." He added, his voice devoid of all emotion. "This apartment is tied to the company, and I'll need it for corporate functions. You can go back to your sisters, I suppose." And with that, he was gone. Mina stood in the echoing silence of the penthouse, the rain lashing the glass. She looked at the empty Scotch glass on the bar, at the indentation on the chair where his coat had been. It was as if he had never existed. She slid down the back of the sofa until she was sitting on the cold marble floor. The baby kicked a hard, sudden jab under her ribs, as if he too could feel the sudden icy void. "It's just us now," she whispered to her stomach, as the first real agonizing sob tore itself from her chest. "It's just us." The humiliation was a physical sour taste that lingered for weeks. Moving out of the penthouse was a blur of sympathetic turned pitying looks from the building's concierge. Marcus, in a final act of petty cruelty, had his assistant, a sharp-faced young woman named Janice, oversee the move, ensuring Mina took only her personal effects. She ended up in the spare bedroom of her sister Chloe's cramped two-bedroom apartment in Bellevue, across the water from the glittering prison of her old life. The room was painted a cheerful but nauseating lavender, and smelled faintly of Chloe's cats. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, was furious. "He's a monster, Mina. A sociopath. He didn't just leave you. He tried to erase you. That algorithm. You wrote the core code for that. You have a claim." But Mina was too broken to fight. She was 32 years old, heavily pregnant and unemployed. She had given up her own promising career as a senior software architect at Microsoft to help Marcus build Thorn Dynamics from scratch. She was a co-founder in spirit, but her name was on none of the incorporation documents. Marcus had insisted it was cleaner to keep it all in his name, that it was all for their future anyway. She, in her love-blinded haze, had agreed. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Marcus's lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, was a shark in a bespoke suit. He painted Mina as a gold digger, despite the fact she'd been with Marcus when he had nothing but student debt and a bad haircut. "Mr. Thorn is offering a one-time settlement of $50,000. Pierce said, his voice smooth as polished stone in a sterile conference room. "In exchange, Ms. Hayes, He made a point of using her maiden name, will waive all future claims to Thorn Dynamics, its assets, and any future earnings. Mina's legal aid lawyer, a well-meaning but overwhelmed woman named Sarah, scoffed. That's insulting. We're talking about a company valued at over $50 million, and there is the matter of the child. Pierce smiled a thin, reptilian expression. Mr. Thorne is prepared to meet the state-mandated minimum for child support. The $50,000 is generous. It's a fresh start fund. If you fight this, we will drag it out. We will counter-sue for emotional distress. We will prove Ms. Hayes was a destabilizing factor, and her condition made her erratic and unfit. Take the deal, Ms. Hayes. Mina looked at her sister, then at her own trembling hands. She had no money to fight. A protracted legal battle would last longer than her meager savings. She was about to give birth. "I'll take it," she whispered the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. 2 months later, Liam Hayes was born. He was small, perfect, and had Mina's deep blue eyes. The moment the nurse placed him in her arms, the fog of her despair began to recede, replaced by a fierce protective instinct that was as sharp as steel. This tiny 7-pound creature was her new center of gravity. Marcus did not come to the hospital. He sent a comically large teddy bear with a Thorn Dynamics logo stitched onto its paw. Mina had Chloe throw it in the dumpster. Life became a rotation of 3 a.m. feedings, diaper changes, and staring at her dwindling bank account. The $50,000 after paying for the hospital bills and her legal aid was evaporating. She was a ticking clock. When Liam was 3 months old, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Ms. Mina Hayes at Chloe's apartment. The envelope was thick, creamy cardstock with the return address of a law firm she'd never heard of, Harrison and Stone, LLP. "Please God, don't let it be Marcus again," she muttered, tearing it open with one hand while balancing Liam on her hip. The letter was brief. It was not from Marcus. It was from the estate of a Mr. Arthur Pendleton. "Dear Ms. Hayes, we are the legal representatives for the estate of your great-uncle Mr. Arthur Elias Pendleton. Mr. Pendleton passed away peacefully last month. You have been named the primary beneficiary of his estate. We request your presence at our offices at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of the bequest." Mina stared at the name. Arthur Pendleton. She hadn't seen him since she was 10 years old. He was her grandmother's eccentric, reclusive brother, a man who lived in a sprawling, dark house on Orcas Island and was rumored to be difficult. Her family had mostly forgotten he existed. "A beneficiary," she said to Chloe, who was reading over her shoulder. "He probably left me a box of old books." "Hey, we can sell them," Chloe said, ever practical. "Go. What have you got to lose?" The next day, Mina bundled Liam into a borrowed car seat and drove to the offices of Harrison and Stone. They were in an old, prestigious building downtown, the kind with polished mahogany and brass fixtures. She felt small and shabby in her maternity jeans and a faded t-shirt. She was ushered into a vast, book-lined office. A man in his late 60s with a kind face and sharp, intelligent eyes stood to greet her. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Robert Harrison. A pleasure. And this," he said, smiling warmly at Liam, "must be the newest edition." "This is Liam," Mina said, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Harrison, I think there's been a mistake. I barely knew my Uncle Arthur." "There's no mistake," Robert Harrison said, gently gesturing for her to sit. "Arthur was a very specific man. He wasn't fond of, well, most people. But he was fond of you." "Me," He sent me a logic puzzle book for my 10th birthday. That was it. He remembered that, Harrison said, sitting opposite her. He said you were the only one in the family who ever solved the puzzle on the inside cover. He's been following your career. He admired your work at Microsoft. He was, to put it mildly, furious when you left to support your husband's venture. He called Marcus Thorne a fool in a hurry. Mina's jaw dropped. Arthur, Mr. Harrison continued, was not just difficult. He was particular. He was also Miss Hayes, the founder of Penned Data Solutions, which he sold to IBM in 1994 for an astronomical sum. He spent the last 30 years living quietly and managing his investments. He slid a thick portfolio across the desk. Arthur had no children. He despised the rest of his family, but he saw his own mind in you. He has left you as the sole beneficiary, his entire estate. Mina opened the portfolio. Her eyes scanned the summary page, but the numbers didn't make sense. They were just strings of zeros. I don't understand, she whispered. What is this that who, Mr. Harrison said, is the controlling interest in a private equity firm, Pendleton Capital Ventures. It also includes a diversified portfolio of tech stocks, real estate holdings, and liquid assets. To put it in layman's terms, Ms. Hayes, your great-uncle has left you an estate valued at approximately $2.8 billion. Mina looked at the sleeping baby in her arms. Then she looked at the number on the page. Then she looked at Mr. Harrison, and for the first time in 6 months, she laughed. It was a wild, sharp, disbelieving sound that filled the stuffy office. The thread she had been hanging from wasn't a thread at all. It was a steel cable. The next 6 months were a blur of lawyers, accountants, and sleepless nights. But this time, the sleeplessness wasn't just from a crying baby. It was from a mind whirring back to life, absorbing information at a speed that stunned the old guard board of Pendleton Capital Ventures. Mina Hayes, billionaire, was a title that felt like a costume, but Mina Hayes, architect, was who she had always been. She had designed complex software systems. A multi-billion-dollar investment firm, she learned, was just another system. It had inputs, outputs, protocols, and inefficiencies. And Mina was very, very good at finding inefficiencies. She did not go on a shopping spree. She did not buy a penthouse. Instead, she bought a sensible, secure brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, hired a discreet and highly qualified nanny named Maria, and promoted Robert Harrison from estate lawyer to CEO of Pendleton Capital, with one caveat: he would be her mentor. I don't want to be a passenger, Robert, she told him, bouncing a giggling 6-month-old Liam on her knee in the new sunlit office she'd had built in her home. I don't want to be a Hayes heir who just cuts ribbons. Arthur left this to me because I could solve a puzzle. This is the biggest puzzle of all. I want to run this. Harrison, who had been bracing for a flighty, grieving woman, found himself facing a focused, ice-cold intellect. He was delighted. Very well, Madam Chairwoman, he'd said, a smile playing on his lips. For the next 4 years, Mina worked. While Liam slept, she studied market analysis, leveraged buyouts, and corporate law. She learned the difference between a predator and prey in the corporate world. She learned to speak the language of power, a language that was all subtext and implied threat. She cut her long brown hair into a sharp, efficient bob. Her wardrobe of faded jeans was replaced by bespoke architectural pieces from Acris and the Row. She wasn't hiding herself. She was armoring herself. She proved to have an instinct for the market that was almost supernatural. It wasn't magic. It was logic. She had been a coder. She saw the patterns. She saw which tech startups were built on hot air and which were built on solid code. Pendleton Capital Ventures, under her silent guidance, became the most aggressive and successful tech investment firm on the West Coast. She became the Seattle Shadow, a mysterious new player who never appeared in public, but whose name on a term sheet made markets move. And all the while she was a mother. She was there for Liam's first steps. She was there for his first day of preschool. She read him Goodnight Moon every single night. Her life was a fortress of two halves, the soft, warm love for her son, and the cold, precise ambition of her work. One person, however, was not having a good 4 years. Marcus Thorne. On the surface, his life was perfect. He and Serena Vance were the darlings of the Seattle social scene, their Instagram feeds a curated fantasy of polo matches, charity galas, and trips to St. Bart's. Serena now. Serena Thorne was a lifestyle influencer. But behind the filters, Thorne Dynamics was bleeding. Marcus had done exactly what Arthur Pendleton had predicted. He was a fool in a hurry. Flush with his initial success and desperate to fund his and Serena's lavish lifestyle, he had expanded too fast. He'd poured millions into flashy marketing campaigns, all starring Serena, of course, and a disastrous new product line of smart jewelry that was buggy ugly and a critical flop. He had taken on massive debt to fuel the expansion. He had borrowed against the company's future, convinced the next big hit was just around the corner. Now the creditors were calling. The interest payments were crippling. Thorne Dynamics, once valued at $50 million, was now a company drowning in $70 million of debt, desperately trying to sell itself before the banks seized its assets. On a rainy Tuesday in March, 4 years after he had walked out on his pregnant wife, Marcus Thorne sat in his sterile, glass-walled office, his head in his hands. "Jonathan," he barked into his speakerphone at his lawyer, "tell me you have some good news. Anyone. I don't care who. Find me a buyer." "It's not good, Marcus," Jonathan Pierce's voice crackled back. "Everyone sees the debt. You're toxic. No one will touch you. Except maybe one." Marcus sat up, hope flaring. "Who? I'll take it. Who?" "A new private equity firm. Very aggressive, very private. They're called Pendleton Capital Ventures. They've been quietly asking questions. They might be interested in an acquisition." Marcus had never heard of them. "Pendleton. Like the blankets, I don't care. Set up the meeting. Offer them anything. Just get me in a room with them." "They don't do meetings like that, bitter Marcus. They're sharks. Their CEO is a man named Robert Harrison. All communication goes through him. And he's already sent a preliminary offer." "What is it?" Marcus demanded, pacing. "It's low, Marcus. They're offering to assume all outstanding debt. In exchange, they get 100% of the company." Marcus stopped. "So, I get nothing. Zero. You get to walk away without $70 million in personal liability, which, by the way, you are absolutely on the hook for. It's the only offer on the table. In fact, it's the only offer you're likely to get. They want to meet Friday to finalize the due diligence." Marcus looked at a framed photo of himself and Serena on a red carpet. He looked at his beautiful office. He was 37 years old, and he was about to be completely wiped out. "Fine," he spat. "Book the meeting. I'll go. I'll meet this Harrison. I'll convince him. I'll convince him my brand, my name is worth something. I'll get an equity stake. I'll get something." He had no idea he was a lamb meticulously fattened, walking willingly to the slaughter. Mina sat in what her team called the war room. It was a secure, soundproofed chamber in the sub-basement of her brownstone, linked directly to the Pendleton Capital offices. The walls were a mosaic of data screens, and at the center was a long black conference table. "He's panicking," said David Chen, her head of acquisitions, a man she'd poached from Goldman Sachs. "He's trying to get a face-to-face with Mr. Harrison, hoping to charm his way into a better deal." Mina looked at the live data feed of Thorn Dynamics stock, which was now trading in pennies. "He believes his charm is an asset. Let him. Robert knows how to handle him." "Madam Chairwoman," Robert Harrison's voice chimed in from the head speaker. "Thorn's lawyer just confirmed he will be at our offices Friday at 10 a.m. for the final review. He still believes this is a negotiation." "It is not a negotiation," Mina said, her voice quiet. "It's a formality. David, what's the status on the debt?" "We own it," David said with a wolfish grin. "All of it. We spent the last 6 months buying it up from his creditors at pennies on the dollar. The banks were so desperate to get it off their books, they practically gave it to us. He's not in debt to the banks anymore, Mina. He's in debt to us. We are the creditor, the debtor, and the sole interested buyer. It's a closed loop." Mina nodded a slow, deliberate motion. "Perfect. Is the other matter handled?" David's grin widened. "The Serena Thorn file." "Oh yes. Her influencer agency, Vance Lifestyle, is leveraged to the hilt by the same bank that held Marcus's primary note. We acquired their debt as part of the package. As of this morning, we own her too. We just haven't told her yet." "Good," Mina said. "One thing at a time. The meeting on Friday. I will be there." There was a sudden silence in the room. Even Harrison on the speaker seemed surprised. "Mina, are you sure you've never attended an acquisition finalization? It's unnecessary. Your anonymity is your greatest asset." "It's necessary for this one, Robert," she said. She looked at a small framed photo on the edge of her desk. It was of Liam, age 4, missing his 2 front teeth and grinning. "He won't be negotiating with you, Robert. He'll be signing the papers, and then you will bring him to the main boardroom. I will be waiting." "As you wish," Harrison said. The next few days were for Marcus a fever dream of false hope. He practiced his speech in the mirror. He was Marcus Thorn, the innovator. He would make them see. He'd convince this Harrison person to keep him on as CEO. He'd get a golden parachute at least. Serena was, for the first time, not helpful. "This is so stressful, Marcus," she whined, filming herself with a new skin-firming wand for an Instagram post. "Are you sure we're going to be okay?" "My agent just called and said our spring campaign was under review." "What does that even mean? I'm Serena Thorn." "It means nothing, baby," Marcus said, straightening his tie, the knot suddenly feeling tight as a noose. "I'm going to fix it. I'm going to meet this Pendleton Capital Group and I'm going to fix it. This Harrison guy, he's just an old money suit. He won't know what hit him." On Friday morning, Marcus kissed Serena goodbye. She barely looked up from her phone, texting someone named Alexei about a potential collaboration in Dubai. Marcus stepped out of his gleaming and leased Maserati and into the lobby of the Pendleton Tower. It was a monument of glass and steel that dwarfed his own rented office space. He felt a sudden unwelcome pang of inadequacy, which he quickly smothered with arrogance. He was escorted to a conference room on the 30th floor. Robert Harrison was waiting. He was exactly as Marcus had pictured, old grandfatherly, and Marcus assumed soft. "Mr. Thorn, a pleasure. I am Robert Harrison." Mr. Harrison, Marcus said, flashing his trademark smile, the one that had won him millions. Call me Marcus. I'm ready to discuss the future of Thorn Dynamics. Excellent, Harrison said, sliding a thick document across the table. The future is, as you know, with us. This is the final transfer agreement. We assume all debt. You sign over all assets, including intellectual property and brand trademarks. Please sign on page 4, 12 and 33. Marcus stared at him. Wait, we're not going to discuss terms. My role, I'm the face of this company. I am Thorn Dynamics. Harrison looked at him over the top of his spectacles. Mr. Thorn, with respect, Thorn Dynamics, is a failing entity with $70 million in debt. Its only value is in its core algorithm, which our team believes can be salvaged. Your face, as you put it, has no asset value on our books. In fact, your personal brand is considered a liability. You will have no role. A liability? Marcus sputtered, his smile freezing. You are Mr. Thorn, what we call a founder failure. You built something and then you broke it with your ego. Now please sign, or we can simply call in the debt we hold. All $70 million of it. Today. At which point we will seize the assets and pursue you in personal bankruptcy. The choice is yours. Marcus's blood ran cold. He had never not once considered that they held the debt. He thought they were just a buyer. He was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. His hands were shaking. The pen felt slick in his grip. He looked at Harrison, who was watching him with the placid disinterest of a biologist observing a specimen. Where do I sign? Marcus whispered. He signed. He signed away his company, his name, his entire life's work, for nothing. Good, Harrison said, collecting the pages. Now there is one final step. Our chairwoman likes to personally meet the founders of the companies we acquire. A formality, if you'll follow me. Marcus, numb and hollow, followed. A golden parachute. Maybe. A consulting fee. He was desperate for any scrap. Harrison led him up a private elevator to the 50th floor. The penthouse floor. The doors opened onto a vast, stunning boardroom with a 360-degree view of Seattle. The entire city was laid out before him. A long obsidian table dominated the room. At the far end, facing the window, sat a single figure. A woman silhouetted against the bright morning light. Mr. Thorn, Harrison said, his voice booming in the quiet room. May I present the chairwoman and sole owner of Pendleton Capital Ventures, Ms. Mina Hayes. The chair swiveled. Marcus Thorn looked into the face of the pregnant wife he had abandoned 4 years ago. But this was not the woman he'd left. The weeping, broken woman in the lavender-scented spare room was gone. This woman was sculpted from ice and steel. Her gaze was level, her expression unreadable, and she was wearing a dark blue power suit that probably cost more than his car. Hello, Marcus, Mina said, her voice as cool and clear as the glass surrounding them. It's been a while. Please have a seat. We have so much to discuss. Marcus Thorn's world did not just tilt. It inverted, shattered, and dissolved into a deafening static. His first idiotic thought was, this is a prank. His second was, she's a secretary, a high-level assistant. This is a joke. She's Mina. He stammered, his voice a full octave higher than usual. He tried for a laugh, but it came out like a cough. What is this? What are you doing here? Mina leaned forward, folding her hands on the polished black table. I'm here, Marcus, because I own this building. I own this table, and as of—" She glanced at her watch, a slim, elegant Patek Philippe. "3 minutes ago, I own you." Harrison stepped forward, his grandfatherly demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp edge of a corporate executioner. "Mr. Thorne, you have been addressing Ms. Mina Hayes, our chairwoman. She is the EH on all internal documentation. She founded Pendleton Capital Ventures." Founded? Marcus's mind was failing to connect the dots. You had nothing. I gave you $50,000. You were living with Chloe. You did. Mina agreed, her voice dangerously pleasant. It was a fresh start fund, I believe your lawyer called it. But you seem to be forgetting my great-uncle Arthur. Arthur Pendleton. He wasn't a fan of yours, Marcus. He left me his hobby. That hobby was Pendleton Capital. The name. Pendleton. It hit Marcus like a physical blow. The blood drained from his face and his ears began to roar. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible," Mina said. "You just never bothered to look back. You were so busy building your new life, you never once wondered what happened to the old one. You just assumed what faded away, disappeared, became a sad little single mother, living on state-mandated child support." She stood up, the picture of power, and walked slowly around the table toward him. She moved with a confidence that made him shrink back in his chair. "For 4 years, Marcus, I've watched you," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it filled the room. "I watched you dilute your own stock to pay for Serena's birthday parties. I watched you take on ruinous debt for a product line you knew was flawed, all to impress people you don't even like. And I watched my team buy up every last piece of that debt. Every late-night loan, every desperate bond. They all belong to me." She stopped directly in front of him. He had to crane his neck to look up at her. "You called me a burden," she said, her voice devoid of heat, a cold, simple statement of fact. "You said I was a vessel. You said I had, what was it, lost my fire." She smiled, but it was a terrifying expression. It held no warmth, only triumph. "The truth, Marcus, is you were always the burden. I was the one carrying you. The algorithm that started your entire company. I wrote 80% of that code. And in the fine print of the intellectual property agreement you just signed, you handed it and all its derivatives back to me. The one valuable thing your company had left is now mine." Marcus was hyperventilating. His vision was tunneling. The room felt suddenly unbearably hot. You did this for revenge," Mina laughed, a real, genuine, and utterly chilling laugh. "Revenge," she said. "Oh, Marcus, you think you're that important? You think I spent 4 years of my life plotting to destroy you? Don't flatter yourself. This wasn't revenge. This was pest control, a hostile takeover, a simple acquisition." She leaned in closer, and his senses were overwhelmed. She smelled of expensive perfume, something dark and complex like sandalwood and victory. "You were a loose end," she whispered. "My son's last name is Hayes. My name is Hayes. The name Thorne is a stain I've been meaning to wipe clean for a very long time. This wasn't revenge, Marcus. It was just good business." That was the moment he broke. The idea that he wasn't even worthy of her hatred, that this entire elaborate 4-year financial execution was just good business to her. It was more than his colossal ego could bear. He made a sound, a strangled, guttural noise. His $1,200 Italian leather briefcase slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. He gasped. I can't. He clutched at his chest, his impeccably tailored suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He wasn't having a heart attack. He was having a humiliation attack. His entire reality, the one built on his own perceived superiority, had been systematically and surgically dismantled by the woman he'd discarded as messy. He collapsed, not in a dramatic cinematic faint, but in a pathetic, clumsy heap. He crumpled against the base of the chair, wheezing his face a mask of sweat and terror. Mina looked down at him, her expression unchanged. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't call for a doctor. She simply stepped back and smoothed the front of her jacket. "Robert," she said, turning to her CEO, who was watching with quiet satisfaction. "Yes, Madam Chairwoman. Please have security escort Mr. Thorne from the premises. He's trespassing." "Immediately," Harrison said. 2 uniformed security officers entered the room. They didn't ask questions. They simply and efficiently hauled the sobbing, hyperventilating Marcus Thorne to his feet, one under each arm. "You can't do this!" he shrieked, his last shred of dignity gone. "Mina, please, think of what we had, Mina." Mina had already turned her back. She was looking out at her city, at the skyline she now commanded. "Remove him," she said, and the doors swished shut, cutting off his desperate cries. Marcus was deposited onto the curb outside the Pendleton Tower. The drizzle of the Seattle morning was cold on his sweat-drenched shirt. People in business suits walked past, their eyes sliding over the disheveled man, weeping on the pavement, and then, as polite society dictates, looking quickly away. He fumbled for his phone. He had to call someone. His lawyer. Serena. Anyone. He called Serena. It went straight to voicemail. "Serena, baby. You won't believe what happened, that witch. Mina, she bought the company. He sobbed. She owns everything. Call me back. We have to do something." He called his lawyer, Jonathan Pierce. "Marcus." Pierce's voice was different. It wasn't friendly. It was cold. "I was just about to call you. I've received a cease and desist from Harrison and Stone. I can no longer represent you. What, you're my lawyer? No, Marcus. My firm was retained by Thorne Dynamics, and as Thorne Dynamics now has a new owner, she is my client. And her first instruction was to terminate your relationship with the firm, citing conflict of interest. My second instruction is to inform you that you are to have no contact with any former employees, partners, or assets of the company, effective immediately. You're working for her. I work for the company, Marcus, and you do not. Goodbye." The line clicked dead. Marcus sat on the curb, the rain plastering his hair to his skull. He was in a single hour, utterly alone. He tried Serena again. Voicemail. He took a cab back to the lavish condo he shared with her. He'd have to sell it. No, she would have to sell it. The lease was in his name. Everything was in his name. He stumbled into the apartment, calling her name. "Serena, we have to pack. We have to go." The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't empty. In the master bedroom, Serena's walk-in closet, usually a chaotic explosion of designer labels, was half empty. Her jewelry case was open and vacant. On the bed in a pristine white envelope was a note. It wasn't even a letter. It was her engagement ring, the 6-carat cushion-cut diamond he'd bought with a line of credit from the company, and a single slip of paper. Marcus. My agent just called. My contract with Vance Lifestyle was terminated by the new parent company. They said I violated a morals clause. And then Alexei called, from Dubai. He said he just got an email from the new head of my agency, a Ms. Hayes. She bought the entire agency, Marcus. She's freezing my assets. She's cancelling my campaigns. She's ruining me. I can't be with a man who lets this happen. I'm going to Dubai. Alexei is going to help me sort this out. Don't contact me. My lawyer will be in touch. S. He stared at the ring. She hadn't even called. She'd heard the news and had simply evacuated, like a rat leaving a ship that was already at the bottom of the ocean. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the gaudy, overpriced symbol of his betrayal cold in his palm. He had lost his company. He had lost his mistress. He had lost his reputation. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass, and now the glass had shattered, and the diamond was sitting in a tower owning the world. He looked around the empty, silent room, a monument to a life of hollow surfaces, and for the first time, Marcus Thorne understood what it truly meant to have nothing. The news hit the financial world like a thunderclap. The Seattle Shadow revealed billionaire Mina Hayes ousts ex-husband in shocking hostile takeover. The story was irresistible. It had betrayal sex money and the most satisfying karmic justice the tech world had seen in decades. The blogs and papers were ruthless. They dug up Marcus and Serena's obnoxious Instagram posts, contrasting them with the quiet, dignified silence from Mina Hayes. They found old college photos of a bright-eyed Mina working side by side with a younger Marcus, and the narrative was set. The king built by his queen had exiled her only for her to return and conquer his empty kingdom. Marcus Thorne was a laughingstock. He was a meme. He was founder failure. He was last seen moving his personal items out of a storage unit, his face shielded from a single persistent paparazzo. Mina, on the other hand, gave one and only one statement. She didn't give it to a financial paper. She gave it to a Women in STEM blog. Pendleton Capital Ventures acquired Thorne Dynamics for its core technology, which we believe was deeply mismanaged. We intend to restructure the company, salvage the IP, and refocus on innovation. This was a business decision, plain and simple. We wish Mr. Thorne the best in his future endeavors. The cold, clinical professionalism of the statement was to those who knew the story more brutal than any insult. She didn't even acknowledge their past, and restructure she did. The first thing she did was rename it. Thorne Dynamics was dissolved. The new entity was called Hayes Pendleton Labs. The second thing she did was call a company-wide meeting. The remaining employees, terrified they were all about to be fired, gathered in the main atrium. Mina walked onto the stage. It was the first time most of them had ever seen her. She was not the monster they'd been led to expect. She was calm, focused, and spoke with the authority of someone who knows exactly what she's doing. "Good morning," she said. "I am Mina Hayes. As you know, I am the new owner of this company. I am also, some of you may remember, one of its original architects. I helped write the first line of code this company was built on in a garage 10 years ago." A murmur went through the crowd. "This company lost its way," she continued. "It became obsessed with image and not with innovation. It prioritized marketing over engineering. That ends today. The smart jewelry division is dissolved. The marketing budget is being cut by 90%. All of that capital is being rerouted into R&D. We are going back to basics, building the best data compression software in the world. She looked out at the faces, the tired engineers, the overworked admins. I know what hostile takeover means, she said. It means layoffs, and there will be some. Anyone in a vanity position, your time here is done. This included Marcus's personal assistant, Janice, who was let go an hour later. But for those of you who build, for the coders, the engineers, the designers, your jobs are not only safe, your salaries are being increased by 15%, effective immediately. The culture of fear and flash is over. We are now a culture of innovation. Welcome to Hayes Pendleton Labs. Now let's get to work. The atrium was silent for a beat, then erupted in applause. Mina watched them, a small, private smile on her face. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. She wasn't just tearing Marcus's empty house down. She was using the materials to build a fortress, a legacy for her son. As for Serena's modeling agency, Mina didn't destroy it. She gutted it. She fired the predatory agents, installed a new female-led board, and changed its entire charter to focus on talent development and financial literacy for young models, ensuring they would never be as vulnerable as Serena had been. Serena herself, after a failed attempt to sue, was last heard of bartending in Dubai, her influencer career over. Mina had taken all the poisoned parts of her past and had, with systematic logical precision, detoxified them. 5 years later. The penthouse office on the 50th floor of the Pendleton Tower no longer felt like a boardroom. It was Mina's private office. One wall was still glass overlooking the city, but the others were covered in books, whiteboards full of complex equations, and cool children's art. Framed crayon drawings of Mummy's Tower and a stick figure, Liam, sat next to financial awards and patents. The door swished open, and a 9-year-old Liam Hayes ran in his school backpack, slung over one shoulder. Mum. Guess what I got the lead in the school play? I'm the protagonist. Mina laughed, swiveling in her chair to scoop him up in a hug. That's my boy. The protagonist, I always knew it. What's protagonist mean again? He asked, burying his face in her neck. It means you're the hero, she said, kissing the top of his head. You're the center of the story. Cool. Robert Harrison, now happily semi-retired but still on the board, poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, Mina, but you have a visitor. Someone not on the schedule. Mina's good humor faded slightly. Who is it? It's Marcus Thorne. Mina froze for a split second. She hadn't seen or heard his name outside of her lawyer's do not contact order reports in years. He's at the front desk, Harrison said, his voice laced with disapproval. He says he's a delivery driver for Postmates. He said he has a food delivery for you. Mina looked at Liam, who was now busy at a small table building a complex Lego creation. He didn't even know his father's name. She felt nothing. Not hatred, not anger, not even pity, just a vast empty distance. He was a stranger, a ghost. I didn't order any food, Robert, she said simply. I know, it's a ham sandwich. He's just standing there. He looks old, Mina thought for a moment. She looked at her son, the true center of her universe. She looked at the empire she had built. And she looked at the door. Tell security to send him away, Robert, she said, her voice soft. "He's at the wrong address. There's no one here by that name." "Very good, Madam Chairwoman." He smiled and was gone. Mina turned back to her son. "Hey, protagonist, how about we finish up here and go get some real food, I'm thinking. The best pizza in Seattle." "Yeah," Liam cheered. Mina Hayes stood, took her son's hand, and walked out of her office. She didn't look back at the window, didn't spare a thought for the man on the pavement, 50 floors below, a man who had collapsed a second time when the security guard told him, "Sorry, sir, no one by that name works in this building." Marcus Thorne had been erased, not by revenge, but by irrelevance. Mina and Liam walked into the elevator, their laughter echoing in the polished steel. She had her past, her present, and her future all in one. She was the architect. She was the hero. She was the center of her own story. And it was a story that was just beginning. And so Mina Hayes proved that the greatest revenge isn't loud, it's silent. It's not about tearing someone down. It's about building yourself up so high that they can't even cast a shadow on you. Marcus Thorne didn't just lose his company. He lost his legacy. He became a footnote in the story of the woman he'd tried to throw away. Mina didn't just get her comeback. She built an empire from the rubble of his betrayal, proving that a burden can become a boss and a vessel can become a vanguard. The ultimate justice is living a life so full and successful that your detractors become nothing more than a bad memory. What did you think of Mina's ultimate comeback? Was it the coldest revenge or just the smartest business? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and vindication, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to see a true boss in action. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every single week. We all have a comeback story in us. What's yours? What happens when a fairy tale wedding turns into a battlefield? Picture this, a magnificent Hamptons estate. A billionaire, groom on the verge of securing his dynasty, and a beautiful bride from one of New York's most powerful families. The scene is perfect, a meticulously crafted illusion of happiness. But an illusion is all it is. In a moment that will go down in society legend. The cathedral doors swing open, revealing a second woman, also in a wedding dress. She is the ghost of his past, an ex-girlfriend he brutally discarded and legally banned from this very event. She isn't here to object. She's here to detonate a secret that will prove that the groom's entire empire is built on a devastating lie. Stay with me as we unravel the story of Julian Croft and the day his carefully constructed world came crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. The late June sun was a paid actor. It streamed through the stained glass windows of the St. Ignatius Chapel in the Hamptons, bathing the assembled guests in a holy golden light that felt both sanctifying and fantastically expensive. Every detail of the wedding of Julian Croft to Charlotte Van Doren had been curated with the precision of a military campaign. The flowers alone, cascading waterfalls of peonies and Dutch hydrangeas, cost more than the average American's annual salary. The guest list was a constellation of East Coast power, old money scions, tech titans, senators, and the kind of tastemakers whose approval could mint a brand overnight. Julian Croft stood at the altar, a man sculpted by ambition. His Tom Ford tuxedo was flawless, his posture impeccable. But a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his brow, a lone crack in the marble facade. He was 34 years old and on the precipice of achieving everything he had ever wanted. Croft Innovations, his AI logistics company, had made him a billionaire. Today, marrying Charlotte, he wasn't just gaining a wife, he was acquiring a legacy. The Van Dorens were old New York, their name etched onto museum wings and university libraries. They were the one thing his new money couldn't buy pedigree. His best man and younger brother Damien adjusted Julian's bow tie with a nervous energy that mirrored his own. "Breathe, man." Damien whispered, his voice a low rumble. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad, not your bride." Julian forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just want everything to be perfect. But it wasn't perfection he was worried about. It was imperfection. Specifically, one very particular 5'7" imperfection named Ava Reynolds. 2 weeks ago, he had sat in a sterile conference room with his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Gavriel. She is not to get within a 5-mile radius of the venue. Julian had said, his voice as cold and hard as polished steel. He'd slid a photograph across the table. It was a candid shot of Ava laughing, her head thrown back, her brown hair catching the light. It was taken during a time he had worked very hard to forget. Her name is Ava Reynolds. She may try to use an alias. She may try to come as a guest of a guest. I don't care if she's disguised as a nun. You stop her. Am I clear? Crystal. Gavriel had replied, not even glancing at the photo. Consider her a non-entity. But Ava had never felt like a non-entity. She felt like a phantom limb, an ache that returned in the dead of night. She was the ghost of Orchard Street, the 2-bedroom walk-up where they had built his empire on a second-hand laptop and take-out containers of cheap noodles. She was the inconvenient truth he had tried to bury under a mountain of cash and a non-disclosure agreement thick enough to stop a bullet. His gaze flickered towards the front pew where his future mother-in-law, Victoria Van Doren, sat like a reigning monarch. Her silver dress was understated and bespoke her posture and advertisement for generations of inherited superiority. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as her daughter's, met his for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a look of welcome, but of assessment. She was the gatekeeper, and he knew with chilling certainty that his acceptance was conditional. Victoria didn't approve of him. She approved of his balance sheet. The Van Doren fortune, while respectable, had dwindled. They needed a capital infusion, and Julian was it, provided he was as advertised, brilliant, successful, and above all, clean. No scandals, no skeletons. The string quartet, tucked away in a loft, swelled into the opening notes of Wagner's bridal chorus. The low hum of chatter among the guests died instantly. A collective sigh of anticipation rippled through the chapel. The massive oak doors at the back of the aisle swung open. And there she was, Charlotte. She was breathtaking, a vision in custom. Vera Wang, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon from which a diamond-encrusted veil cascaded down her back. Her father, a portly man with a kind but worried face, had her arm tucked in his. As she began her slow, regal procession down the aisle, a genuine smile finally broke across Julian's face. He saw his future walking towards him. The summer home in Nantucket, the penthouse on Park Avenue, the children with their mother's eyes and his ambition. The cover of Forbes, the whispers of respect when he entered a room. Everything he had clawed his way up from poverty to attain. He looked at Charlotte, and for that single fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe the story he had told everyone, including himself. The anxiety receded, replaced by a wave of triumph. He was safe. The ghost had been exorcised. The gilded cage was finally his. Ava Reynolds did not look like a ghost. Ghosts are ethereal, translucent. In the back of a black SUV parked a block away from St. Ignatius, she looked painfully, terrifyingly solid. The wedding dress she wore was not a grand confection like Charlotte's would be. It was a simple, elegant sheath of ivory silk she'd bought at a vintage store years ago, back when a future with Julian had seemed not only possible, but inevitable. It was the dress she would have worn. Putting it on this morning had felt like an act of both sacred remembrance and profound sacrilege. Her best friend Ben Carter sat beside her, his hand gripping hers. His knuckles were white. "Last chance to back out, Ava," he said, his voice gentle. "We can drive to Montauk, get drunk on the beach, and throw rocks at the ocean. No one would blame you." Ava shook her head, her gaze fixed on the chapel spire visible over the treetops. "If I back out now, he wins. He erases me completely." Her mind drifted back, not to the ugly end, but to the brilliant beginning. They had met at a dingy tech incubator in a shared workspace in downtown Manhattan. He was the charismatic visionary with a head full of disruptive ideas. She was the quiet, brilliant coder who saw the structural flaws in his grand designs and knew instinctively how to fix them. They were fat and gasoline. For 3 years, their lives had been a blur of caffeine code and a love so intense it felt like it could power the city. Their apartment on Orchard Street was their entire world. The office was a corner of the living room, where 2 desks were pushed together, their monitors practically touching. Croft Innovations wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born over greasy pizza at 3 a.m., its foundational algorithms written by Ava on a whiteboard, while Julian paced and dreamed out loud. The name itself had been her idea. "It's your name," she'd said. "You're the face. I'm happy to be the engine." That was her mistake. She trusted him. She believed that their love was the only contract they needed. The shift was gradual, then brutally swift. The first round of venture capital changed him. He traded his worn jeans for tailored suits. He started talking about optics and personal branding. He moved their offices to a sleek, impersonal space in the financial district, and suddenly the engine was hidden away in the basement. The breakup happened on a Tuesday. He came back to the Orchard Street apartment, which he hadn't slept in for weeks, and told her it was over. He was clinical detached, like a surgeon removing a tumor. "I'm moving in a different direction," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. "Personally and professionally." "What does that mean?" She'd asked, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "It means the company needs a different kind of public face. We're courting a different class of investor. You and we're not the right story anymore." The right story turned out to be Charlotte Van Doren, whom he'd met at a charity gala 2 months prior. The betrayal of his heart was devastating, but the betrayal of their work was a deeper wound. 2 days after he left, a check arrived via courier for $1 million. With it was the NDA. It was a document of total erasure. It stipulated that she could never claim to have worked for, contributed to, or been a part of Croft Innovations in any capacity. It stated that if she ever spoke of their personal or professional relationship, he would not only sue her for the $1 million back, but would countersue for damages to the company's reputation to the tune of $50 million. It was a gag order, a threat, and an insult all in one. He was buying her history, their history, for a fraction of what it was worth. She never cashed the check. For a year, she was paralyzed by the injustice. She watched from the sidelines as he was hailed as a lone genius, the next Steve Jobs. Every article that praised his innate coding talent felt like a knife twisting in her gut. He had stolen her work, her future, and her past. The wedding announcement was the final catalyst. Seeing his smug, triumphant face next to the perfect society princess lit a fire in her. This wasn't just his wedding. It was his coronation, a celebration of the very lie that had destroyed her. And she decided with a clarity that felt like destiny that she would not allow it to happen. "It's not about winning him back, Ben," she said, her voice low and steady as she finally turned from the window. "I wouldn't take him back if he were the last man on earth. It's about truth. He gets to stand in that white church and be celebrated as a self-made man. I'm here to remind him and everyone else that he wasn't self-made. He was made by me, and I'm the bill that's finally coming due." Ben squeezed her hand one last time. "Okay, then let's go raise some hell." He got out and opened her door. As Ava stepped out of the SUV, the ivory silk of her dress pooling for a moment on the asphalt, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a reckoning, and she was about to walk into her own wedding. Inside the chapel, the air was thick with ceremonial reverence. The minister, a man with a soothing, practiced cadence, was speaking of unions, partnerships, and the sacred journey of two souls. Julian stood facing Charlotte, holding her delicate hands in his. He was so close. The words "I do" were forming on his lips. He gazed into Charlotte's blue eyes, a perfect reflection of the future he'd designed. "And do you, Julian Croft, take Charlotte Van Doren to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or for poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Julian drew a breath. This was it, the final seal on his new life. Boom. The sound was not loud, but it was definitive. It was the sound of the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel being pushed open with force, swinging inward until they banged against the stone walls. Every head in the room swiveled in unison. The string quartet faltered, a single violin screeching into the sudden cavernous silence. And there, framed in the archway, like a spectre at the feast, stood Ava Reynolds. She was a column of pure white against the darkness of the vestibule. Her simple dress, her unbound hair, her lack of a veil. It was a statement of raw, unadorned presence. She wasn't an imitation of the bride at the altar. She was an alternative, a question made flesh. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was a sound of shock, of confusion, and for a few in the know of delicious, unadulterated scandal. Phones previously tucked away emerged as if by magic. The professional photographers, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly, their flashes beginning to strobe like frantic heartbeats, capturing the tableau that would be on the cover of every tabloid. By morning, the groom frozen in horror, the bride, her perfect smile collapsing into a mask of disbelief, and the woman at the door, the other bride. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. It was a nightmare, a living, breathing, silk-clad nightmare. Gabriel had failed. The 5-mile radius, the disguises, the threats, it had all been for nothing. She was here. Charlotte's hands went cold in his. Her head turned slowly from Ava back to him, her eyes wide with a dawning, humiliating horror. "Julian," she whispered the name, a fragile question mark. "Who is that?" But Julian didn't answer. His entire focus was on Ava, who had taken a single deliberate step into the chapel. His shock was rapidly curdling into a white-hot rage. How dare she? How dare she try to ruin this, the most important day of his life? Victoria Van Doren's reaction was faster. With a barely perceptible flick of her wrist, she signaled to the two broad-shouldered men in dark suits who had been standing discreetly against the wall. They were her personal security, and they began moving towards Ava instantly, their steps silent and predatory. They were halfway down the aisle when Ava's voice rang out clear and steady, without a trace of hysteria. It cut through the shocked whispers like a shard of glass. "Stop!" To everyone's astonishment, the security men actually paused. Her command was absolute. She took another step forward. Her eyes were not on the guards or the stunned guests, or even on Charlotte. They were locked on Julian. It was a gaze that held 3 years of shared history, of love and betrayal and simmering injustice. "Before you have me thrown out, Julian," she said, her voice resonating in the chapel's perfect acoustics, "perhaps you should explain to your bride and to her family what this is." Her hand came up, and in it she held a single folded document. It was a simple piece of paper, but she held it like a weapon, or a shield. The security guards looked from her to Julian, then to Victoria, awaiting confirmation to proceed. The entire room held its breath. The minister stood with his mouth agape, his prepared words about love and fidelity dissolving into irrelevance. Julian stared at the paper in her hand, and a new, colder fear washed over him, extinguishing the fire of his rage. He didn't know for certain what it was, but he had a sick, sinking feeling. An NDA could be explained away. A lover's quarrel could be dismissed as drama. But a document was proof. "What is this spectacle?" Victoria Van Doren's voice was low and lethal as she rose from her seat. "Remove her, now." But Ava didn't flinch. She just kept her eyes on Julian, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "Go on, Julian. Tell them. Tell them all who I am." The challenge hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was trapped. In front of him stood the perfect future. Behind him stood the undeniable truth, and he knew in that gut-wrenching moment that he could no longer have both. The document in Ava's hand trembled, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. Yet to Julian it seemed to shake the very foundations of the chapel. The world narrowed to that single piece of paper. The scent of the peonies was suddenly cloying, suffocating. The holy light from the stained glass windows felt like an interrogation lamp. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and forward planning, became a frantic cyclone of disastrous outcomes. He saw the gleeful headlines, the plunging stock ticker, the smirks on the faces of his rivals. He saw the Van Doren name, his golden ticket, turning to ash. He had to regain control. He opened his mouth, prepared to unleash a torrent of dismissive lies, to paint her as an obsessed, hysterical stalker. But the words that came out were a pathetic squeak. "It's nothing." He managed his voice, a hoarse croak that betrayed his panic. He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that was supposed to look casual, but was jerky and unconvincing. He turned to Charlotte, forcing his face into a mask of pained sincerity. "Darling, I am so deeply sorry. She's a disgruntled ex. This is a pathetic, desperate stunt for money. Let's just have her removed so we can continue our day." Charlotte, however, was no longer looking at him. Her brief, wounded fawn expression had vanished, replaced by the chillingly focused calm of a predator assessing a threat. The Van Doren instinct for survival, honed over generations of navigating social and financial minefields, was now fully engaged. This was no longer just a romantic humiliation. It had the distinct metallic scent of a business complication. "What is the document, Miss Reynolds?" Charlotte asked. Her voice, unlike Julian's, was perfectly steady, cutting through the chapel's tense silence. She didn't look at Julian for permission. She had taken command. Ava's eyes flickered from Julian to Charlotte, and for a fleeting moment, a glimmer of something unreadable pity perhaps, or a strange sort of female solidarity passed between them. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. "Why don't you ask your fiancé?" she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "He should recognize it. It's the original Articles of Incorporation for Croft Innovations." She let the words hang in the air for a pregnant, devastating beat, her gaze sweeping over the front pews before landing back on Julian. She delivered the final killing blow. "The company he founded. With me." A tidal wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the pews. Co-founder. The word was a poison dart. Julian saw it strike Marcus Thorne, the hedge fund titan whose eyes narrowed in instant, cold calculation. He saw it hit Victoria Van Doren like a physical blow, her regal posture stiffening as the full implication, the one catastrophic possibility her team of lawyers and investigators had missed, slammed into her. This wasn't just a skeleton in the closet. This was a structural flaw in the foundation of the entire deal. "That's a lie!" Julian shouted, his voice finally finding its volume, but cracking with desperation. "A pathetic, baseless lie. Her name is on nothing. She signed an NDA. The mention of the NDA, meant to be a show of force, was a catastrophic mistake. It was an admission that there was something to be silenced, something worth paying for. Victoria's eyes flashed with fury at his stupidity, and then the second, more intimate and far more lethal betrayal of the day. "She's not lying, Julian." The voice was quiet, heavy with a sorrow that made it all the more damning. It came from beside him. It was Damien, his own brother, his best man. Julian whipped his head around, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. But Damien refused to meet his gaze. Instead, his younger brother looked out at the stunned crowd, his face a miserable portrait of guilt and resolve. "I was there," Damien said, his voice gaining strength as he unburdened his conscience. "I was a notary back then, trying to make extra money. I notarized the original partnership agreement in their apartment on Orchard Street. Before the venture capital funding, before the lawyers got involved. Before you pushed her out and rewrote the history." He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, glistening with tears, found Ava at the back of the chapel. "We all know Ava built this company with you." If Ava's entrance was a bomb, Damien's confession was the dirty radioactive fallout that contaminated everything. Julian stared at his brother, the world tilting on its axis. The betrayal was so absolute, so inconceivable that for a moment he couldn't even feel rage, only a dizzying sense of disbelief. His own blood. The scene finally shattered its fragile container of social decorum and descended into open chaos. The photographers, sensing the story of a lifetime, surged forward like a single organism, their flashes strobing relentlessly. Guests were on their feet, not just whispering, but talking openly, their voices a rising tide of scandalized chatter. The minister, looking utterly lost, had backed away from the altar as if it were cursed. But the real explosion, the one that would level Julian completely, was yet to come. It came not from the ghost at the door, nor the traitor at his side, but from the bride. Charlotte grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into the fine wool of his tuxedo like talons. She yanked him violently to the side behind a large marble pillar, creating a tiny private pocket in the public maelstrom. Her face, moments before a mask of pale shock, was now transformed into a canvas of cold reptilian fury. "You idiot!" She hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that was more terrifying than any shout he had ever heard. "You breathtaking, incompetent, utter idiot!" Julian was reeling his mind, unable to process the speed of his own destruction. "Charlotte, listen to me. I can fix this. I can fix this." She let out a short, incredulous, mirthless laugh. "Fix this with what more lies? More sloppy, half-baked cover-ups?" She leaned in closer, her breath hot against his cheek, her blue eyes like chips of ice. "Did you really think we were that stupid? That my family, the Van Dorens, wouldn't do a background check so deep it would make the CIA blush? We have a whole firm on retainer for this, for vetting new money liabilities, exactly like you." Her words were rapid-fire bullets. "We knew about Ava Reynolds. We knew she was the Orchard Street project. We wrote her off as a manageable risk, a bitter college girlfriend you paid off with $1 million. Pathetic but contained. My mother sat you down in the library 3 weeks ago. She looked you in the eye and asked, 'Julian, are there any other documents? Any other inconvenient partnerships from your past that might emerge?' And you smiled that smug smile of yours and you lied directly to her face. You didn't just lie to your bride, you fool. You lied to Victoria Van Doren. You have absolutely no comprehension of the catastrophic mistake you have just made." Julian felt a cold dread, slick and oily, creep up his spine. This wasn't the wounded cry of a heartbroken lover. This was the furious post-mortem of a CEO whose merger has just spectacularly imploded due to undisclosed liabilities. "I don't understand," he stammered, the words feeling thick and stupid in his mouth. "Of course you don't," she sneered, her lip curling in disgust. "You never did. You were so busy buying your way into our world, you never bothered to understand how it actually works. You saw us as a prize, a name, a beautiful backdrop for your pathetic Horatio Alger story. You never once stopped to ask why. Why we were so eager to welcome a tech billionaire with no family, no history, no pedigree into the fold." She delivered the truth with the brutal efficiency of a guillotine. "My family is broke, Julian," she said, each word a perfectly enunciated shard of glass. "Not poor darling, never that, but broke, leveraged to the hilt on bad real estate deals and my father's disastrous belief in oil futures. One more bad quarter, one more creditor calling in a note, and the whole house of cards comes down. We didn't need your love. We didn't need your charisma. We needed your company. We needed Croft Innovations, a clean, scandal-free, cash-positive asset with a meteoric stock price. It was our life raft." She gestured vaguely towards the chaos in the chapel. "And you, with your secret co-founder and your notarized partnership agreements, have just riddled that life raft with holes. A foundational legal claim to the intellectual property. A public scandal that will send the stock into the toilet before the markets even open on Monday. You haven't just embarrassed me. You have financially ruined us." She took a step back, her assessment complete. Her eyes raked over him one last time, with a look of such profound contempt it physically hurt him. "You're not a visionary. You're not a genius. You're a bad investment. You are in every sense of the word completely and utterly worthless." The word hung in the air between them. Worthless. The primal fear he had spent his entire life running from the label he thought his billions had made him immune to was now his final official designation. He looked from Charlotte's face contorted with a rage born of financial desperation, to her mother Victoria, who was now standing with her lawyer, her expression not one of anger, but of cool, pragmatic damage control. He looked past them to Ava standing quietly at the back of the chapel, her expression not triumphant, but somber, watching the collapse of the world they had once built together. And in that horrifying, crystallizing moment, Julian Croft finally understood. He wasn't the predator in this gilded jungle. He wasn't the clever hunter who had trapped the perfect prize. He was the prey. He was the golden goose they had lured into their pen, and he had just confessed to his buyers that his eggs were made of lead. He had been played outmaneuvered and utterly, totally vanquished. Charlotte's final hissed word, worthless, was the gunshot that started the race. A race for everyone to distance themselves from Julian Croft as quickly and publicly as possible. The victor by a landslide was Victoria Van Doren. With the calculated poise of a CEO announcing a hostile takeover, she rose from her pew and glided to the front of the chapel. She didn't hurry. Her movements were deliberate, designed to draw every eye. She ignored the minister, who now looked like a bewildered bystander at a multi-car pile-up, and positioned herself at the center of the altar, reclaiming the stage. The murmuring chaos subsided as she prepared to speak. Her voice, when it came, was not raised, but it carried the chilling authority of old money and absolute power. To our esteemed friends, our family, our honored guests, she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled titans of industry and society mavens. She subtly acknowledged Marcus Thorne, the powerful hedge fund manager in the third row, whose fund held a significant stake in Croft Innovations. You have borne witness today to a most unfortunate and disillusioning event. She paused, letting the drama hang in the air. The Van Doren family entered into this proposed union in good faith. We believed Mr. Croft to be a man of vision, yes, but also a man of integrity. We believed his narrative of singular, self-made success. It has become painfully, publicly clear that this narrative is a fiction, a deception. She turned her head slowly, her ice-blue eyes pinning Julian to the spot. We have been presented today with evidence corroborated by Mr. Croft's own brother that his success was not his alone. That the very foundation of his company, the value upon which this union was predicated, is built upon a lie of omission, and it would seem the blatant theft of intellectual property. A fresh wave of gasps and frantic whispers rippled through the pews. Victoria had just handed every investor, every journalist, the exact legal terminology they needed. She had weaponized the scandal for them. This union, she announced, her voice dropping to a lethally calm register, is hereby terminated. The Van Doren family will not under any circumstances be proceeding with this marriage. She held up a hand to silence the burst of camera flashes. Furthermore, let me be unequivocal. We will be filing a lawsuit against Mr. Croft for fraudulent misrepresentation and breach of the nuptial contract. We entered into this arrangement under the assumption of his sole ownership of a company whose valuation is now a matter of serious legal jeopardy. He has not only humiliated my daughter and betrayed our trust, he has attempted to defraud my family. We will see him in court, and we will pursue this matter to the fullest extent of the law. It was a public execution, delivered with the serene smile of a surgeon. In 2 minutes, she had completely rewritten the narrative. The Van Dorens were no longer desperate socialites clinging to a tech billionaire. They were the shrewd, aggrieved victims of a contemptible fraud. She had insulated her family and delivered Julian's head on a silver platter. With a final withering look that communicated utter revulsion, she turned, took Charlotte's arm, and began her regal, unhurried retreat down the aisle. Charlotte, for her part, played the role of the shattered bride beautifully. Her head bowed her Vera Wang veil, now a shroud of tragic dignity. Their departure broke the spell. The social fabric of the room tore apart. The guests, understanding the verdict had been delivered, began a mass exodus. It wasn't a panicked rush. It was a controlled, almost chilling stampede of the elite. No one made eye contact with Julian. He was radioactive, a social leper. A senator he'd golfed with last month hurried past, suddenly fascinated by his shoes. The wife of a tech CEO, who had gushed about his genius at a dinner party, literally turned her back as he looked her way, creating a physical wall of silk and disdain. The exodus was a sea of averted gazes and frantic whispers, 1,000 tiny knives of social shunning. He was left standing alone at an altar, built for a future that had just been firebombed. The opulent arrangements of peonies and hydrangeas, once symbols of his triumphant arrival, now seemed like funeral wreaths on the grave of his ambition. The only person who approached him was Damien. His brother's face was a wreck of conflicting emotions: guilt, fear, and a stubborn sliver of righteousness. "Julian, I had to." Damien started, his voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't let you." "How?" Julian snarled, spinning to face him. The word was low, guttural, packed with a lifetime of fraternal rivalry, now curdled into pure hatred. "You sanctimonious little worm. You stood there, my best man, and you gutted me." "It was the truth," Damien shot back, finding a sliver of courage. Don't you remember? Don't you remember those nights on Orchard Street when you were sick with the flu and she stayed up for 48 hours straight, rewriting that entire algorithm from scratch because you said it wasn't elegant enough? Do you remember her crying when you finally got that first seed money? Not because of the money, but because she said, "We did it, Jules. We really did it." The memory so long suppressed lanced through Julian's fury. He did remember. He remembered the smell of cheap coffee and her hair as she fell asleep on his shoulder, the keyboard still warm. The memory made his betrayal feel even viler, and his rage surged to cover the shame. "You think you're a hero?" Julian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You just destroyed your own family for a woman who hasn't been part of our lives for years. You are dead to me. Do you understand? Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret." Damien flinched as if struck. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a grey, hollow look of defeat. He opened his mouth to say something more, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked away, not down the main aisle, but through a small side door, disappearing like a coward. Julian was now truly alone. Except for her. He turned his gaze to the back of the chapel. Ava hadn't moved. The chaos had swirled around her, but she had remained a fixed point of stillness, the calm eye of the hurricane she had created. The document was a crumpled mess in her hand. Her shoulders were no longer squared with righteous fury. They were slumped with the profound, soul-deep exhaustion of a soldier who has won a war only to find the battlefield silent and empty. There was no look of triumph on her face, no gloating smirk. There was only a vast, hollow sadness. He felt an insane urge to rage at her, to blame her for all of this. He took a step down the aisle toward her. "Are you happy now?" he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You got what you wanted. You ruined me." Ava finally looked at him, and her gaze traveled over the opulent, empty room, the wilting flowers, the abandoned programs littering the pews. Her eyes, when they met his, were filled not with hatred, but with a weary, devastating pity. "Look at all this, Julian. she said, her voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the stillness. Look at this grotesque theater you built. Did you really think this was winning? She shook her head slowly. Nobody won here today. I just came to collect on a debt. The bill is paid. That's all. She let the crumpled document fall from her fingers. It fluttered to the stone floor, a forgotten casualty of the war. With that, she turned. For a moment, Julian thought she might say something else, offer one last word of damnation or farewell. But she didn't. She simply walked out of the massive oak doors and into the sunlight. Her simple white dress, a stark final rebuke to the Vera Wang-clad lie he had tried to build. She didn't look back. The moment she was gone, the silence was broken by a roar. The paparazzi held at bay until now surged past the overwhelmed security, their cameras flashing like a violent electrical storm. The noise was deafening, the questions shouted and incoherent. Julian felt a hand on his arm. It was Gavriel, his face grim. "Sir, we have to go. Now." Julian allowed himself to be pulled away, stumbling like a drunk. The flashes were blinding, each one feeling like a physical blow. He wasn't the brilliant tech mogul. He wasn't the society groom. He was just a story, a cautionary tale. The man who tried to buy a legacy and erase a history, only to lose everything in a single spectacular self-inflicted blast. He was worthless. And in the blinding glare of his public ruin, he knew with chilling certainty that it was the only true thing anyone would ever say about him again. The hours following Ava's departure were a blur of exquisite humiliation. Julian remained rooted to the spot at the altar, a statue in a Tom Ford tomb long after the last guest had fled. The flashes from the paparazzi outside the chapel doors were relentless, their ghostly light painting the stained glass windows in strobing infernal patterns. He felt like an animal in a zoo, his public caging complete. His security head. Gavriel finally materialized, his face a grim mask of failure. "Sir, we need to move you." Julian didn't respond. He was listening to the sound of his future being dismantled, one whispered phone call and one frantic news alert at a time. The hashtag #WeddingGate was already trending. The ride back to Manhattan was silent. Gavriel drove his eyes fixed on the road, the air in the car thick with unspoken recriminations. Julian's phone, which he'd left with his security team, was a vibrating brick of incoming notifications. He scrolled through them with numb fingers. Hundreds of missed calls. His lawyer, his PR chief, every single member of the Croft Innovations board, and a single brutal text from his brother. "I'm sorry. It was the right thing to do." Julian hurled the phone against the divider, where it shattered into a spiderweb of black glass. He spent that first night in his penthouse, a glass palace overlooking a city that now scorned him. He prowled its empty, cavernous rooms, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, watching his own immolation on every news channel. There was the footage Ava ethereal and damning in her white dress. Charlotte, her face a perfect mask of aristocratic fury. Victoria Van Doren, delivering her lethal proclamation. And him. Julian Croft, the self-made billionaire, looking small, trapped, and utterly defeated. The commentators were sharks in a feeding frenzy, tearing apart his reputation with glee, framing the story as a modern-day Icarus tale. He wasn't just a liar. He was a cliché. The business collapse was even swifter and more brutal than the social one. When the stock market opened at 9:30 a.m. on Monday, Croft Innovations' CRFT was in free fall. Julian watched the ticker on a financial news network, the red arrow pointing down like a spear aimed at his heart. Billions of his net worth evaporated in minutes. The emergency board meeting was convened via video call that afternoon. It was a bloodbath. The members, men and women who had praised his genius and cashed his checks for years, now looked at him with cold contempt. Led by a hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne, a man Julian had once considered a friend, they invoked a morals clause in his contract. Your actions constitute gross misconduct and have caused irreparable reputational damage to this company. Thorne said, his voice devoid of any emotion. We are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman of the board. You can't do this. Julian snarled, the Scotch making him reckless. I am this company. No, Julian, Thorne replied coolly. You're a liability. The board vote is unanimous. Your access will be terminated by the end of the day. The screen went blank. He was locked out of his own kingdom. The Van Doren lawsuit landed the next day. It was a work of legal savagery, a 50-page document detailing charges of fraud, intentional misrepresentation, and emotional distress. Their lawyers, a famously ruthless firm, leaked select damaging excerpts to the press, ensuring the narrative of Julian as a manipulative monster was cemented in the public consciousness. The cruelest cut came a week later. He saw his brother Damien on a morning news show. Looking tired but resolute, Damien gave a quiet, heartfelt interview, publicly apologizing to Ava Reynolds for his complicity and his silence. He explained how Julian's ambition had curdled into a corrosive greed that he could no longer stand by and witness. He announced he was leaving his position at Croft Innovations and taking a job with a legal aid society. Julian watched, shaking with a rage so profound it felt like a physical illness. His own family had publicly chosen her side. The betrayal was absolute. The following months were a descent into a grey, featureless hell. Julian became a prisoner in his own home, the sprawling penthouse a gilded cage. He fired his household staff, unable to bear their pitying glances. He let the floor-to-ceiling windows gather a film of city grime, keeping the blinds drawn, living in a perpetual twilight. Paranoia became his only companion. He was convinced his phone was bugged, that every car parked across the street was a surveillance van. He spent his days obsessively scrolling through articles about his downfall, rereading the vicious comments, torturing himself with the evidence of his global disgrace. He saw photos of Charlotte in St. Bart's, laughing on a yacht with a handsome German duke, her trauma apparently assuaged by Mediterranean sun and new money. She had successfully rebranded herself as the resilient survivor. Meanwhile, a different story was taking shape across the East River. After the wedding, Ava had been hounded by the press. For 2 weeks, she was painted as the vengeful, woman scorned, a narrative she found almost as suffocating as Julian's initial erasure. But she and Ben hunkered down, ignored the noise, and focused on the work. Using the notarized partnership agreement Damien had confessed to, and bolstered by Damien's public apology, Ava had leverage. She didn't want to sue for a piece of the dying Croft Innovations. She wanted a clean break. She wanted to build something new. She took a meeting with Athena Ventures, a female-led VC firm known for backing overlooked female founders. She didn't lead with the scandal. She led with the code. For 2 hours, she walked them through a new, more elegant and efficient logistics algorithm she had been developing in secret for the past year. It made the core technology of Croft Innovations look antiquated. The firm's lead partner, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, listened intently. At the end of the presentation, she leaned back. "The technology is brilliant, Ms. Reynolds, but the world knows you as the woman who crashed a wedding. Why should we invest in that?" Ava met her hiss without flinching. "You shouldn't invest in the woman who crashed a wedding. You should invest in the woman who built the company that wedding was supposed to celebrate. The woman who was so ruthlessly effective that Julian Croft had to pay millions to silence her. I didn't crash a wedding to get revenge. I did it to get my name back. Now I want to put that name on a company that values integrity as much as innovation." She got the funding that afternoon. She called her new company Axis for the way it would become the new center of the industry. Her first hire was Ben. Her second was a young engineer she'd mentored years ago. She built her office in a bright, airy loft in Brooklyn, fostering a collaborative culture that was the antithesis of Julian's top-down, fear-driven regime. The Wired article titled "The Phoenix of Silicon Alley" was her public coronation. It told the full story, painting her not as a victim or a villain, but as a brilliant technologist who had reclaimed her power. The accompanying photo showed her at a whiteboard marker in hand, surrounded by her diverse, smiling team. She looked purposeful. She looked free. Reading that article was the final nail in the coffin of Julian's ego. He realized with a soul-crushing certainty that her rebellion had never truly been about him. Destroying him was just a necessary step in her process of creation. He was a footnote in her comeback story. This realization sparked a desperate final impulse. He needed to see her. He needed some form of closure, of absolution, of anything other than this suffocating indifference. He showered for the first time in days, put on a clean suit that hung loosely on his frame, and took a car to Brooklyn. When he walked into the bright, buzzing offices of Axis, it felt like stepping onto another planet. People were talking, laughing, collaborating. Ben Carter spotted him instantly, his friendly face hardening as he moved to intercept. "You have no right to be here, Julian." But Ava had already looked up from the whiteboard she was working at. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a merry resignation. She held up a hand to stop Ben, then nodded toward a small, glass-walled conference room. The silence inside was deafening. He looked at her truly, looked at her for the first time since that day in the chapel. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a calm, centered confidence. She was no longer the ghost of Orchard Street. She was the CEO of Axis. "I came to apologize," he began the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "For everything. For stealing your work, for breaking your heart, for trying to erase you. I was so lost, so desperate to prove I was worthy that I became a monster." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry." Ava listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she asked a simple, devastating question. "Are you apologizing because of what you did, Julian, or because you got caught?" The question hung in the air, a perfect, polished mirror reflecting his own pathetic soul. He wanted to scream, to protest, to insist his remorse was genuine. He tried to summon the righteous indignation, but it wouldn't come. He saw the truth laid bare in her unwavering gaze. He was sorry because he had lost. He was sorry because his name was worthless. His penthouse was a prison, and his life was empty. His apology was the final selfish act of a drowning man begging for a raft. He had no answer for her. His silence was his confession. A slow, sad nod was her only reply. "I thought so," she said softly. "I wasted a year of my life hating you. Then I wasted a few months being afraid of you. I'm done wasting my time on you, Julian. That day at the wedding wasn't the end of my story. It was the end of my story with you. It was the only way I could get back to my own life, to my own work. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting and the end of them for good. The thing is, I don't hate you anymore, she said, her voice clear and final, devoid of passion or malice. To hate you would mean I still care. You're just a chapter I've finished, reading a bad investment I've finally written off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. She turned and walked out of the conference room, without a backward glance, immediately rejoining her team at the whiteboard, her back to him. Julian remained in the glass box, a specimen on display. He watched her point at the board, her team nodding eagerly, the energy of creation palpable even through the soundproof glass. He was an outsider looking in at a world he had helped create, but could never be a part of. He had been utterly and completely erased, not by a legal document or a public scandal, but by something far more permanent, her complete and total indifference. He walked out of the vibrant office and back into the grey afternoon. He was Julian Croft, the man who had everything and nothing, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life, forever chained to the memory of a woman who had finally gloriously learned how to build a world without him. And so Julian Croft's gilded empire, built on a foundation of stolen ideas and profound betrayal, crumbled to dust. This wasn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It was a brutal lesson in consequences. It shows that the truth, no matter how deeply you bury it, has a way of clawing itself back into the light. Ava Reynolds didn't just crash a wedding. She reclaimed her life and her legacy, proving that true power isn't about the money you have, but the integrity you keep. Julian wanted to buy respectability, but he learned the hard way that it can only be earned. What would you have done in Ava's shoes? Would you have taken the money and stayed silent? Or would you have risked it all for the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of dramatic justice and spectacular downfalls, please give this video a like, share it with a friend, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true-life dramas.